We have 7 incredible writers here tonight, from published authors to emerging authors to people who just tell great stories. We have Megan Veren. Where is she? She's battling a cold right now, but she is compulsed to be here because we have an incredible audience right now. So let's give a really warm round of applause for her and for her story.
This is an essay I wrote called Driven. Unlike my grandfather, whose only car as far back as I can remember was a well-loved gold 1967 Ford Mustang, my father went through cars with a gambler's cavalier disregard. While my grandfather and all of my friends' fathers carefully maintained the family vehicle, we never went on a vacation without a car breaking down. My father's short-lived vehicular delights, like all other property, were mere flights of fancy. Nothing was sacred. A yellow Chevy Malibu, a red Chrysler convertible, a green Ford station wagon, a Chevy van, a Mercedes sedan. The list goes on. In addition to land vehicles, my father briefly owned a 4-seater twin-engine 1967 Beechcraft Bonanza that came with a personal pilot. While for many people the family car was a hallowed institution, thoughtfully purchased and preserved, my father's cars appeared out of nowhere and were readily discarded, as were his drivers, though we became much more attached to the drivers than to the cars. In the big swap meet of life, cash rarely changed hands. Cars were often thrown in as part of a bigger business deal. If not a car, then a collection of estate jewelry, antique dolls, or Chinese rugs. My mother never knew what sort of flotsam might float through the door. Not to mention she, the manager of all things domestic, and the family chauffeur, never knew from one day to the next what she would be driving. It was a quirky game of roulette my father played. Perhaps if he hadn't lost his vision as a young man, we would have had one car, like other families. The first driver I remember, a standout among the roll call, was Lemuel J. Johnson. He was 6'4", weighed 280, and had gleaming white teeth offset by obsidian skin. Lemuel's most remarkable characteristic, of which he was extremely proud, was the 6th finger he had on both hands. Less than 2 inches long, and each with a tiny fingernail at the end, they dangled like afterthoughts from each of his pinkies. During Lemuel's 6-year tenure, we had 2 Austin Healey's and a white Jaguar XKE. Lemuel would drive Dad, bundled up in car coats, across the Bay Bridge in the Jag, top down and heat at full blast. Herb Cain of the San Francisco Chronicle actually mentioned my father in his column in the early 60s, referring to him as the only man he knew with a chauffeur-driven sports car. What Herb Cain didn't know was that my father needed a chauffeur because he was blind. When Lemuel would drive us around Berkeley, I marveled at how he maneuvered his bulky frame into the tiny driver's seat. My father packed the 5 of us kids into the back, then took his place on the passenger side. 7 pimentos stuffed into 1 tiny green olive. I met the next driver, Junior, the summer of '64, the day I returned from Girl Scout camp. Alone in the parking lot, I watched the other girls reunite with their families, scan the crowd for a familiar sight. My mother, my father, a recognizable car. It was only after the last Girl Scout sped off with her parents that I saw Daddy, stepping out of the passenger seat of an unfamiliar, massive gold sedan, waving his hand in the air like a frenzied flag. I ran toward the car, dragging my duffel bag, hoping for my mother. In her place behind the wheel sat an unfamiliar man, smiling like he knew me. Daddy grabbed my bag, gave me a bear hug, scooted me in. I slid into the cavernous back seat. The car smelled like cigarettes and doublemint gum. Honey, I want you to meet Junior. The man in the driver's seat turned and flashed a wide smile, revealing a gold front tooth, his hair all pomade in waves. The muscles in his neck, back, and upper arms flexed against his blue-collared shirt. I've heard a lot about you. Very pleased to meet you, young lady. His high-pitched voice was sweet as honey. Nice to meet you, I said. Where's Mom? At home, in bed with a headache. I imagined her lying privately in the darkened room, curtains drawn, door closed. It would be days before she would reemerge. What kind of car is this, I asked, sliding my hands back and forth across the smooth leather. This here is a brand new Chrysler Imperial, Junior said with pride, making me think that we were driving in his car. I sprawled across the seat, luxurious, especially after hours on that squeaky bus, not to mention 3 suffocating nights in the camp infirmary with German measles. My father instructed Junior to turn left at the edge of the parking lot. He asked me questions like how many badges I'd earned and if I'd made friends. I told him my tent mate was okay, my counselor was mean, and the Girl Scout badges were a stupid waste of time. I learned that Junior's real name was Edward Eugene Griffin. He turned out to be just another in the long list of drivers, and the Chrysler Imperial one in the eccentric menagerie of cars that would come and go during my childhood. Junior stayed long enough to drive another Chrysler as well as a wood-paneled town and country station wagon. After Junior came Charlie, Melvin, Clarence, and Bug Juice, and my father's feverish horse trading continued. When I was in high school, we owned a black Imperial with white leather upholstery, a fully restored green and black 1948 pickup known as the Batmobile, a green Chrysler station wagon, a gold Lincoln Continental, a gray vintage Jaguar, and an orange Carmen Ghia. In the early 60s, my father even owned a cattle ranch where he amassed a colorful collection of Chevy trucks and drivers. To this day, we get a lot of mileage from stories about my father's hit parade of flashy rides and the drivers who ferried him from place to place. My father sat in the passenger seat of countless vehicles, placing his life and ours in the hands of men of dubious backgrounds and questionable sobriety. Our final family car, my mother's turquoise 1979 Cadillac Seville, was the only one in the collection that was deliberately purchased, conscientiously maintained, and fully paid for. When my father died in that car at age 61, the man behind the wheel, who blacked out and drove into a tree, was not a hired driver, but rather a longtime family friend. I went to look at the Cadillac after the accident, my way of paying homage to the final car. It was completely totaled. The wreckage was heartbreaking, symbolic, a reminder that my father's death mirrored his reckless, go-for-broke life. I took comfort in the thought that when my father crossed over, my grandfather was waiting for him in his perfectly maintained gold 1967 Mustang.